we'll go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to the Borough of Red Bank Master Plan Public Workshop. Very much appreciate your time and efforts joining us tonight. So we will go ahead and get started. The development of the master plan is being overseen by the borough's master plan committee, which includes the names you see here on the screen and includes representatives from the planning board, police chief, director of community development, as well as the Honorable Mayor of Red Bank. This effort is being undertaken by BFJ Planning, a planning firm with extensive experience writing municipal master plans in New Jersey and throughout the region. My name is Ryan Walsh. I'm a community engagement manager with FHI Studio, and we are supporting the development of the plan. This is our agenda for this evening. We're going to start with an overview of what is a master plan. We'll dive into a project overview, and then report out some of the existing conditions data that we've received and give an overview of Red Bank today with the key takeaways. We're going to spend a substantial portion of time reviewing what we heard in virtual workshop, which we closed recently, and then talk a little bit about some small area plans that are part of this master planning effort. And then we'll end with a Q&A session. So as you have likely already noticed, we have participants muted to avoid distracting background noise. We are going to be using a piece of software called Poll Everywhere to gather your input during the meeting. More on that in just a moment. We do have the chat window open, and that's available for comments. I do want to note we are very focused in the conducting of the meeting, and it's not going to be a heavily moderated chat. But we will download it at the end and really review all of the comments that we received there. And at the end, we're going to do a Q&A where participants will be able to unmute themselves and ask any questions or provide comments. And you likely saw a warning, but just to repeat, this workshop is being recorded. So we're going to jump right into Poll Everywhere. This is a live polling software that we can use to ask you questions and get your answers on the screen in real time. Throughout the rest of the meeting, we're going to be asking you to respond to questions and prompts, and you're going to see your answers reflected live. So to access that tool, the easiest way to do this right now is to open the chat, and Kelsey has put that link, www.pollev.com/redbank into the chat. If you click on that link or just open another browser window and put in that URL, it'll bring you to the tool where you enter your name, click continue, and then throughout the rest of the meeting, we'll ask you to respond to those prompts and questions. And that's going to be actually the best way to participate in this meeting, is to have sort of two windows that you either toggle back and forth between or set up side by side so that you can put in your responses and then also see the presentation and the results on the screen. So I'm going to give everybody a minute to navigate there. It's worth it. I encourage you to participate in the tool. And if I move on, don't worry, any of the polling slides will have instructions up at the top explaining how to join. So if it takes you a minute to get there, don't worry. And as a first exercise, we're asking to understand who's in attendance tonight. Let us know if you are A, a Red Bank resident, B, a business owner, C, a borough employee, D, an elected official, or E, a resident from outside of Red Bank. And you can select multiple options. If multiple categories apply to you, you can select more than one here. So it looks like overwhelmingly, the folks we have in the room are Red Bank residents, with 87% of respondents responding that way. And then a couple business owners, some borough employees, and a couple people from outside Red Bank. So it looks like those responses have settled down. And you can see those instructions up at the top of the screen. If you decide that you want to join, you can go to pollev.com/redbank You can also join via text message. Those standard rates apply by texting Red Bank to 22333, and your phone will give you the same options. All right. So I'm now going to turn to Susan Favate from BFJ Planning to give a project overview.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. And it's great to see everyone virtually here tonight and to see the numbers continuing to go up as more folks join. So we're excited and we look forward to a good conversation tonight. So we thought we'd get started by first sort of outlining what the process is for the master plan update. What is a master plan, some of the basics, and to give you all a sense of the context here. So just generally and broadly speaking, a master plan in the state of New Jersey is a policy planning guide. It is adopted by the planning board in each municipality. They are the ones who have that jurisdiction. And it really is meant to be a vision and a blueprint for whether it's growth or revitalization, preservation, really how particularly land use, but various other aspects of the community are treated. It is not in itself a law or a mandate, but it does give that policy guidance for those laws and regulations, particularly things like zoning and capital investment, how the municipality wants to spend money on parks, infrastructure, other types of community upgrades. And it really is meant to be grounded in community engagement so that it is a reflection of the vision of the larger community. And there are state regulations that govern how often master plans have to be updated and also what they can contain. So the municipal land use law does require every municipality to re-examine or update their master plan at least every 10 years. And Red Bank has done that, as you see at the left. The borough has periodically updated its master plan as required by state statute. It has been quite a while since Red Bank has adopted an entirely new master plan, really since 1995. So certainly a lot has changed since then, and that's why we're here tonight, is that the borough is embarking on a brand new master plan, and it's really a great time to sort of test the vision and get a sense for where we want to go for the future. Okay. Just to give you a sense of the overall process, this really kicked off at the beginning of the year, and so we have been working in the last few months primarily looking at existing conditions. That's the task that you see here called Red Bank Today, really diving deeply into Red Bank and what is happening in the community, what are the trends, what has changed in the last 10 years and beyond, looking at your existing studies and prior plans, and there are a lot of them. Red Bank has been very active in planning and studying various topics. We've been meeting with borough staff. We've been doing some focus groups, which you'll hear a little bit about with stakeholders who are knowledgeable in certain areas. And really ongoing throughout this process, we're doing a lot of things on the community engagement front. We have been meeting regularly with the Master Plan Committee. We had some website updates, and there has been a virtual workshop that was conducted over a period of weeks. And you'll hear more about that as well in terms of what we heard from that. This is the first community-wide sort of live workshop. And there will be a second one in the fall, which is designed to be in person. So you'll be hearing more about that as well. So we're sort of at the end of the existing conditions Red Bank Today phase, and we're moving into the recommendations and draft plans. So over the summer, we'll be really digging into what are the strategies that speak to what we've been learning about. How do we address some of the issues that we've been discovering and hearing about from the community, and what is the overall vision and goals and objectives of the plan. And then we'll come back at the end of the summer or early fall and present some of those strategies and recommendations to you all, the public, and then spend the rest of the fall really refining the plan, drafting it up so that we are on target for public hearing for the planning board to consider adoption of the master plan. Really by the end of the year is the overall timeline. So we have been talking to a lot of folks. What we've been doing through the Red Bank Today process, which you'll hear about some of the key takeaways, it's really a mix of qualitative and quantitative data analysis. So on the quantitative side, it's looking at things like the census, it's understanding economic trends, it's getting a sense of what the borough has been working on in terms of their projects and initiatives, but it's also qualitatively hearing from different people about what their concerns are, what they think some of the major issues are. So we started off talking to borough staff and some of the agency heads, so across the range of topics that you see here, including folks from outside Red Bank as well. We talked to some county planning folks and also New Jersey Transit, really the sort of small focus groups with those individuals and committees and representatives. And then we did some, a little bit more public facing focus groups, people who are active in Red Bank across these topics, people who are knowledgeable about these areas. So for example, in the downtown, we heard from the Business Alliance. We also talked to River Center, the Visitor Center, and you see the list here. I'm not going to read every one of them, but we basically held a lot of calls with a lot of different people, and it was really interesting to see where some issues overlapped and where we also heard different things. And we just recently had one with middle school students, which was really interesting. And then we are still looking to schedule one with the Red Bank High School students at some point in the near future. So really a pretty wide cross section, but now is a chance to really talk to the larger community and let you know really what we've been learning about and test that with you. So I'm going to hand it to Peter Vanden Kooi from BFJ, who's going to take you through our existing conditions piece, Red Bank Today.
Thank you, Susan. So yes, as Susan mentioned, I want to provide an overview and summary of the Red Bank Today report, which is focused on existing conditions. And as one of the first steps in preparing that report, of course, we want to look at all the documentation that's been generated to date. And she had mentioned the 1995 master plan that was followed by a 2019 reexamination report. There's also other sort of ancillary chapters of the master plan that were produced at different times between 1995 to date. You can see them listed here, focused on like municipal stormwater management plan, historic preservation element, bicycle and pedestrian planning project, not a master plan element, but a technical report, train station report, comprehensive parking study, and a housing plan element and fair share plan. These are some of the major documents that we looked at. We also took a look at many other policy documents, both produced by the borough, also documents from the county, and data available from the state and the federal government to help inform the report. Next slide, please. So the Red Bank Today report is organized into 6 chapters. First being, of course, an introduction and setting the context for the report, followed by population and socioeconomic trends, land use and zoning, transportation and mobility, community facilities, resources and programs, which also includes open space and recreation, and sustainability, infrastructure and resiliency, which is focused on green building, water and sewer infrastructure, other types of infrastructure, and resiliency in terms of vulnerability as far as coastal flooding and things like that are concerned, as well as other hazards. And the different trends that we saw that came out of this study, starting with demographic trends, include that the population has grown by 22% since 1990, which is significant. The growth was most significant among children and seniors, with declines in working age adult populations. The borough remains diverse, but people of color fell from 50 to 45% since 2010. Most of that decline was among those of African American descent, 24%. And the household income has grown, but 1/3 of residents still earn less than $50,000 per household. In terms of economic trends, since 2010, the borough has seen job growth in construction, accommodation, food services, and management, and some job losses were seen in administration and support, waste management, and healthcare. Job growth among Red Bank residents has been strong, plus 19% since 2010, and most employed Red Bank residents commute elsewhere, but double commute into the borough. 12% actually live and work in town as well. In terms of land use and development, the borough is, of course, at or very close to build out, with most of the opportunities being small infill lots or redevelopment opportunities of older land uses. Significant development has occurred around the train station, which is a statewide trend, and that's occurred more so in recent years than in the earlier part of that time frame. There's a significant amount of tax exempt property, and those would include lands owned by the hospital, nonprofits, churches, and other religious organizations. And the borough has been proactive on affordable housing. Several developments have been implemented and constructed, and there's others that are in process at this point. For transportation and mobility, most of the borough is walkable. However, some improvements are needed for safety and functionality, particularly among, rather at the busiest intersections and along the busiest corridors in terms of improvements for safety. Traffic is, of course, a serious issue. The at-grade train tracks, one interesting finding was that, when a train pulls into town, multiple, if not all, train gates close at the same time, which kind of bisects the town and really snarls up traffic. That could be combined with, if that occurs around a school hour or other factors, there are some significant traffic issues. Crash hotspots were noted at the locations on the slide, and of course, many of them being very busy roadways. There's more bike infrastructure is needed. However, that would need to be balanced with the other uses on the street, including parking, and would have to be carefully designed. And inadequate parking was found to be a common complaint, but many lots are underutilized, some private, some public. So there are also some opportunities. And for community facilities, resources, and programs, we found that the access to parks exists, but is uneven between the east side and the west side of town. One of the things that we're looking at is Bellhaven Nature Area, but also Sunset Ave Park, which is one of the special areas that we're looking at. There's three areas that we're giving particular focus, and so we're looking into that in terms of expanding the recreational opportunities on the west side of town. Waterfront access and connectivity represents a key issue and opportunity area. Borough has several waterfront easements, and those are areas where there may be an opportunity to enhance waterfront access and potentially interconnect some of the existing access ways to expand waterfront opportunities overall. Many of the borough facilities are constrained and in need of upgrades, especially the DPW building at Borough Hall. School enrollment has leveled off, but the district does need a consolidated preschool and other improvements. And there's also a potential for designation of additional historic resources. And lastly, Red Bank, this ties in with the coastal vulnerability assessment, which is a new municipal land use law requirement. And municipal land use law is the state regulation that really requires the master plan to be prepared and really sets all the different requirements of what must be included in a master plan. And so we've completed a climate change and vulnerability assessment that found that Red Bank does have some coastal flooding vulnerability, but it's less than many other municipalities in the county, being at, I think it was impacted less than 5% in terms of land area during Sandy versus much higher percentages in some of the other Monmouth County municipalities. There's many opportunities to expand sustainability efforts, including green infrastructure and green building. And one example is greening of parking lots and other areas where there might be existing impervious coverage that could make a difference in terms of the aesthetics and also the stormwater benefits and other green benefits. And lastly, aging water and sewer infrastructure is a significant issue. There are areas of town where the infrastructure is, approximately or over 100 years old, where upgrades are needed at this time. And if not just yet, there'll be additional upgrades needed probably sometime soon. And I think this is the last slide before key takeaways. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susan.
Yeah, so we just gave you a very quick run through in I think about 6 slides, what summarizes this essentially about an 80-page document of an existing conditions report. So that document will be made part of the overall master plan, and we'll look to share it with the public as well. So we gave you a very quick overview, but so when we think about what all of this means, and what can we kind of take away from this really big wealth of data, is some of what we've been hearing qualitatively too, is that Red Bank is a special place, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. If you live here, or you work here, you love Red Bank. There is a special vibe to it. It is unique in Monmouth County. It's unique in New Jersey. It's not other places. It's its own animal. It's got arts and cultural offerings that draw people from really throughout the region, and it's really drawing people year round at this point. But it's also got that classic small town feel. There's a wealth of mom and pop stores that people are really proud of. And there's the quality of life that brings people and brings families, into town and makes it a great place to live and raise a family. We heard repeatedly, and we saw it ourselves, that waterfront is, an underutilized asset. It is something that really is special about Red Bank and provides great opportunity. And also it's not presenting as much vulnerability to Red Bank as perhaps some of your neighbors see. So just because of your topography and the nature of the river and the way it sort of winds, you're actually a little bit less vulnerable to sea level rise. It doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable in some way, but you're in a little bit better shape than some of your neighbors, which is kind of a nice thing to see, and present some opportunities there as well. Red Bank is a diverse place. Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That is, we think, a core strength. It is something that is truly special about Red Bank, and is something that is appropriate to build off of in terms of attracting people and attracting a wealth of businesses. And there's just a really strong breadth of community organizations and different types of businesses. And then lastly, you have some key major employers that really span multiple sectors of the economy. The hospital, you have major office buildings, 2 hotels, and a pretty substantial retail and service corridor that is growing. And so that means that you're not overly reliant on any one economic sector, which is generally a pretty healthy place to be. So these are really great assets. We feel that we can kind of take out of this existing conditions report and build on that and see where it takes us. There's some issues as well, some challenges. We've heard repeatedly, and again, not telling you anything you don't know, but that there's a really big concern about growth, that because you are such an attractive place to visit and to live, that there is a strong development interest in Red Bank, and that is growing, and that there's a fear that will help, or that will make the borough lose what makes it really unique and special. And at the same time, we've also heard, and we know from our own market analysis and our experience, that it's really important for revitalization in a downtown that you do activate underused properties, that you revitalize vacant areas and places, and that attracting these new residents is really vital for the local business community. So balancing those two often opposing goals is a real challenge, and is something that we think will be a major element of the master plan. We've heard repeatedly about traffic and congestion, and I think Peter touched on it. The nature of the railroad tracks sort of dividing the town, the nature of Red Bank being such a destination as well as a pass-through to reach other areas, means that traffic is a really significant quality of life issue. And that's not necessarily easy to fix, given that some of these roads are not under the borough's control. It's often in other jurisdiction, whether it's county or state. So we want to really look at what are the aspects that the Red Bank can control, and what strategies might we encourage for the borough to undertake. Peter also mentioned that you are a largely built out community, and what that means, not only in terms of revitalization, meaning that it's going to be mostly infill redevelopment, but that you have space constraints. When you look at things like borough needs and municipal needs and the schools, there's a lot of competing forces for a small land area. So it just means that we need to be cognizant of that, and the different users of that land. Affordable housing is a major issue. And I think that ties in with the growth that you've been seeing, and the concern that it needs to remain an affordable place for people to live. And there's no one solution that's going to solve all of those problems, that we really need to look creatively at what options are for improving the affordable housing picture, and also allowing people to have better access to their jobs and goods and services. And Peter spoke a little bit about climate change vulnerability. We've actually looked at this a lot, because it is that new requirement of municipal master plans in New Jersey. And so we've already gotten a lot of data here. And you've been hearing that you're actually not quite as vulnerable as some of your neighbors, but that doesn't mean you aren't vulnerable. And so there are steps that we think the borough should be looking at, and options that should be explored to be a little bit more active and prepared when it comes to issues of resiliency and sustainability. So those are just some key challenges. And when we kind of started pulling all this together, and we wanted to test this with you tonight, what was really coming out is these sort of 4 emerging themes, and you see them here. It may be one way that we think about organizing the master plan. And the first is, connected. Red Bank should be a connected place. And I think the most obvious aspect there is traffic and mobility. When you think about cars, pedestrians, bicyclists, clearly everything should be well connected, but also connection to the waterfront, and connection to a downtown that is cohesive and is unified, both on the on the traditional Broad Street corridor, as well as the emerging area around the train station, that it is the single connected downtown. Red Bank should be equitable, and the aspects of equity that you see here are affordable housing, we spoke about just a minute ago, Equitable access to parks. So Peter spoke about that as well, that there's an uneven distribution largely because of the geography, historic geography of Red Bank between east and west. So we want to make sure that residents have equal access to parks, and that there are strong neighborhoods that have equitable quality of life, and that they have the amenities and the services that they need for that quality of life. We've been thinking a lot about balance, that Red Bank should be balanced, and that really is balancing those often competing forces of revitalization, but also preservation. And so smart growth, again, preserving that quality of life, looking at preserving your historic assets, really kind of balancing all those different forces. And then lastly, the Red Bank should be prepared. And I just spoke a lot about that in terms of climate change. That's kind of an obvious one, and sustainability, but also prepared about the right amount and the right types of municipal services and facilities that will serve your changing population over time. So these are just kind of ways to think about these different issues that we've been hearing about and frame the discussion. And we're interested, I think on the next slide, we have our first poll, our first content poll. Just how well do you think these themes that we've just touched on capture some of the things that you would like to see in the master plan, some of the issues that you see in your everyday life?
And I'll just add, we've had quite a few people join in the past few minutes. So I'll give you instructions. You can see up at the top of that slide, if you go to pollev.com/redbank, you can answer this question. Or if you open the chat window, there's a link directly in there. So you can just click on that link and provide your response.
So far, it's good to see that there are no Ds. That's good. And for those who are answering maybe somewhat, it means we might be missing something. So feel free to share that in the chat or hold on to it if you want to raise that as a comment or a question at the end. Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it to Kelsey at FHI, who is going to go through the virtual workshop and everything that we learned from that exercise.
Thanks, Susan. So hello, everybody. So a really big part, in addition to the focus groups that we did, was we wanted to reach the community directly, and we did that through a virtual workshop. And so we wanted to make sure that this workshop was as accessible as possible. So we made sure that anyone could access it on a desktop computer, on a tablet, or on a mobile device. And we also made sure it was accessible in English and in Spanish. And as far as doing some initial outreach to promote the workshop, we did a general e-blast to all of the project stakeholders that we have been in touch with and in communication with throughout this process. We got in touch with the Red Bank Borough Public School District, and were able to post the flyer in English and in Spanish on the school website. We also did a pop-up in April at the Red Bank Craft Fair, and hopefully met a lot of you there. And let people know about the project and handed out flyers. And we were also in touch with communities of worship in Red Bank and made sure that they understood that the project was going on and how they could contribute. And finally, we had some media coverage by Tap into Red Bank and Red Bank Green, who let people know that the workshop was taking place and that they could contribute. So as we were receiving input, we did want to make sure that we were getting very diverse input, just as diverse as the community itself. So we continue to do outreach. We did a drop of flyers at the Parker Health Clinic and talked to staff there to make sure that they let any folks know who were visiting the clinic that the workshop was taking place, and we wanted to hear from them. We also did a pop-up event at Lunch Break, which is an organization in Red Bank that provides meals and groceries to folks who need them, who either live in Red Bank or live out of town. And we also stopped by the senior center on bingo day and had a wonderful time talking to the seniors there and learning about their thoughts and feelings about their community and their wealth of knowledge from having lived there. for so long. And finally, we did a targeted e-blast to the Red Bank Borough Public Schools Latinx parent group. So we connected with them actually at one of our earlier pop-ups at the craft fair, and were able to get information out about the workshop and hopefully had some participants there. So we had over 1,000 people actually come and visit the workshop, and 525 activities completed. So now I'm going to pass it on to Ryan, and he'll tell you about those activities and what we heard from you.
Thank you, Kelsey. So hopefully most of you were able to participate in the virtual community workshop. For those who didn't, I'll give a brief overview of the activities that were included. It had 3 main parts. The first was a priority issue exercise, where we asked participants to rank their top 3 priorities from a list of issues and explain why those issues or how those issues impact their lives. In the second activity, we asked you to call upon your local expertise and give us your best idea for how to make Red Bank a better place. And then in the third activity, Love It or Change It, this was a mapping exercise where we asked you to put dots on the map to show locations or things about Red Bank that you love and things that you would like to see change, and then follow that up with an explanation of why. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to review what we heard. We've included direct quotes, so what you're going to see is really in your own words, and then we're going to follow up with some poll everywhere questions to make sure that we heard you correctly, and anywhere that we got it wrong, we want to hear that as well. So starting with the priority issue ranking. This is the full list of 12 priority issues in order of ranking by participants. The colored bars indicate what rank the respondent placed that theme in. So red was the person's top choice, the dark blue was their second choice, and the light blue was their third choice. We're gonna narrow in on these top 5 choices for which at least 30% of respondents selected as one of their top 3 choices. Though I will note that we have captured your comments and thoughts about all of these topics. There are a couple things that I want to just make note of on this chart. The top 5 priority issues were revitalization, new development standards, parks and open space, traffic, and then walking, biking, and transit. And you'll notice with walking, biking, and transit, though it is ranked the 5th priority issue, it had by far the highest number of first place rankings. Almost 20% of people who responded selected walking, biking, and transit as their number 1 priority, with fewer people selecting it as a second or third option. And on the flip side, if you look at new development standards or parks and open space, those issues had relatively low percentages of people selecting it as their first choice, but much higher percentages as selecting that as a second or third tier priority. So now for each of these top 5 priority issues, we're going to go in and cover what we heard. So for each of these issues, we have slides like this. I'm going to walk you through. We have the priority issue listed at the top. So in this case, revitalization, that number 1 priority. Then we've synthesized an action theme for that priority issue. And these themes are action statements that we came up with that really capture a selection of common kinds of comments that we heard. So in this case, under revitalization, there was a lot directing us to improve the vibrancy of downtown Red Bank. And then these are actual quotes that we received to support that theme. So in this case, vacant properties negatively portray the town. Downtown is becoming a ghost town. There are empty storefronts and vacant lots that do nothing for the community. Place a vacant tax on the landowners to encourage them to develop or sell. Or you have to find the balance between revitalization and the need for open space, parks, etc. Within revitalization, another theme was that we should redevelop vacant and underused properties. People said things like, I want to see the vacant buildings on Red Bank's main road revitalized to enhance the quality of life and walkability for my family and create tax revenue for the town. Better management of vacant land, revitalized by renovating and repurposing existing structures. And current design trends produce unattractive, unlivable, and incredibly boring neighborhoods indistinguished from cities across the US. In terms of new development standards, we heard that we should ensure the building of high quality, attractive development that has sufficient infrastructure to support it. People talked about that there's too much strain on the town's resources and roadways, that tall buildings are an eyesore. Some people said that density is a good thing, but you have to make it attractive or treat it in a certain way. There were lots of comments about how new build quality is poor or creates cookie cutter buildings that are boring. And then finally, in new development standards, there was a significant call to expand the amount of affordable housing. The town needs new housing for residents that already live here and not millionaires. The insistence of keeping single family homes is limiting affordability. We're overdeveloping without putting any controls on rent levels. And then here's a suggestion: bring in an affordable housing developer who can use their expertise to build apartments for people who are not already rich. And calls to maintain the character of Red Bank by enforcing stricter design standards and sticking to the established zoning. This was something we heard a lot of, that large buildings are going up and changing the character of the town, they're burdening infrastructure. Development standards should be decided and not negotiable by each developer by throwing money and promises. And ignoring code and improving variances for huge luxury projects encourages speculators and drives up prices, making it impossible for my family to live here. Commercial needs should be better balanced with the needs of the town and its people. Moving on to parks and open space, that third priority issue. We heard a lot of calls for increasing green space in Red Bank, especially along the riverfront. There needs to be more parks and open spaces on the west side. We currently only have the new nature preserve and the playground at the primary school, Sunset Park. Create a skate park for skateboarders, bicyclists, and teenagers. Development of a river walk from Marine Park all along the Navasink to the Sunset Ave along the swimming river. This was a very popular idea that we heard in several places throughout the virtual workshop. And more pedestrian plazas would make the town more walkable and create destinations for people to walk to. Also in parks and open space, a lot of calls to provide more programming in open space and parks. I thought shutting down Broad Street to create the open air promenade was a great idea. We should do that every year. We need community-based early childhood and middle school opportunities for exercise and fun. There were also calls for older teenagers needing places to recreate. We do some senior center activities in the park, but we could do more. We could do more for seniors. Encourage food trucks. Here's an idea to do pop-ups in underused areas, such as Marine Park. Other than the farmers market and townwide fairs, there's little food truck activity. And then there were a lot of calls to maintain existing parks that are in need of repair. Marine Park needs a major renovation. Eastside Park needs beautification and enhancement. Riverside Gardens needs an invasive vine removal. Restore the pergola and snack bar. Tennis and pickleball courts. And I'd like to see Marine Park become a place where residents can enjoy the views, take walks, play tennis, listen to concerts. The parking lot is an eyesore. Moving to traffic, we heard a lot of calls to address congestion by updating traffic patterns. That traffic and the pattern flow is awful. One-way streets are created for business concerns without consideration for traffic flow, sending everything into the neighborhoods. The traffic in Red Bank has become unbearable. So many streets are incredibly congested. West Front Street, Maple, Shrewsbury, Dr. James Parker Boulevard are ridiculous, almost around the clock. I would go to downtown way more if parking and traffic weren't so difficult and biking is too dangerous. And then calls to ensure that development is planned alongside traffic improvements to reduce congestion from increased residents. So traffic in town is horrible and only getting worse. I'm for development, but there needs to be major traffic flow improvements for Route 35 and for NJ Transit intersections. And traffic is growing worse as more variances are granted. The new master plan should not significantly increase zoning, height, density maximums, as parking is untenable at their current levels. And navigating in and out of Red Bank has become much more difficult due to traffic volume, no doubt due to all the new luxury condos. And then finally, that fifth top priority, walking, biking, and transit. Lots of calls to update infrastructure and better inform drivers to make walking and biking safer. As a frequent pedestrian, lack of enforcement of speeding, running stop signs, driving wrong way is a dangerous issue in town. Drivers don't pay attention to crosswalks. Invest in more corner barriers to give pedestrians more space and prevent cars from getting too close is also a priority. Cars are not respectful to pedestrians. Broad Street and West Front Street feel unsafe. We need better infrastructure to make the town more pedestrian and biker friendly. So now turning back to our poll everywhere question, how well do those themes, those action statements that I call out, capture your individual priorities for Red Bank? And we'll give you a moment to get those responses in. And again, for those of you who may have joined late, you can find a link in the chat, or you can just open another browser window, go to pollev.com/redbank, and you'll be able to answer these questions along with other respondents. And so it looks like we're about evenly split between very well, mostly, with some folks saying somewhat, there's some room for improvement. So I'm going to move to the next question, which is now an open-ended question. For those of you especially who thought they somewhat reflected your views, what was missing? What didn't we capture in those action themes? And I'll give you a minute to respond here. You can respond with just a word or a complete sentence or even a longer thought. Give those a minute to come in. And if I don't get to you, so we have not enough homeowner outreach and input, okay? Access to water, its use. Concerns for the historic fabric. Historic preservation and affordable housing. And school space issues, that you're right, that's not one that came up. So that was a lot very fast, and I may have missed it, but I don't think I heard a lot about housing affordability. You're right, and I apologize for speaking quickly. We do have a lot of content and information that we received that we want to get your input on. So there's more to the traffic challenge than just local development. Senior housing to keep our people in town. I would have liked to hear more about priorities 6 and 7, echoing school space issues. No problem. So most views were from a self-selected audience. Priorities were determined by the consultants. There's also a very big picture issue being ignored. So please provide us what those big picture issues are. I'm going to move on to the next topic, but this poll question will remain open until I get to the next one. So please continue to provide your responses, and we'll have those captured on the back end. So in the second activity, we asked you to come up with your best idea for how to make Red Bank better. And these are the top 5 most liked ideas that we received. And we mapped them to the action themes that you, or priority issue rather, that we just talked about. So the number 1 top liked issue or idea rather was the development of a river walk from Marine Park along the Navesink to Sunset Ave along the swimming river. The next had to do with affordable housing. So bring in an affordable housing developer who can use their expertise to build apartments for people who are not already rich. Revitalization, better management of vacant land like Azalea Gardens or Riverview Hospital's lots on the south side of Front Street, so they do not devolve into chronic eyesores. The 4th was attract more small businesses, art studios, and unique retailers, close Broad Street for walking plaza. And then finally, the top 5, enforce density and zoning laws that have been put in place for a reason. Do not allow NJ Transit to lease parking lots to a developer who will build a massive apartment building. We need more parking, not less. So now I will move on to our next question. And do you agree that these great ideas would improve Red Bank? So here it looks like we have a little bit more diversity. About half of folks are saying that, yeah, mostly these would improve Red Bank, but some people saying somewhat or not at all. Looks like those bars have mostly settled in, so I'm going to jump to the next question, which what are the critical ideas that we did not mention? Or for those of you who felt that those ideas were off the mark, tell us what you think would make Red Bank a better place. And again, since you have to type these in, I'll give you a minute to get those responses in. Center the bikers and pedestrians. So put them at the center of planning. Higher density around the train station is a good idea. Better leadership. Accessory dwelling units. And we have some great parks, but they're not maintained. All the new landscaping around Broad and White Streets are not being maintained. And then, yeah, leadership. Our seniors and lower income families are being forced out. So again, that issue of affordability. And so some of the folks who didn't like those ideas felt that there are too many negative assumptions about development. We want to see other transit options, especially for seniors. The town is already overdeveloped. More attention to what we have, plant trees and flowers in vacant lots instead of looking for new developers. Pedestrian safety, less density, traffic calming in residential neighborhoods, and cleanliness. So I'm going to move on to the next topic, but this will stay open, and we'll continue to receive your ideas as they come in. So in the third activity, this was the mapping activity where we asked you to put dots on a map to show us things that you love about Red Bank or that you'd like to see change. So in this image, the green dots are the ones that people love, and the red dots are things that people would like to see change. We did a little bit of heat map analysis. So this looks at the density of where the dots appear. And for Lovett, these 3 areas really jumped out as a tight concentration of things that people love about Red Bank. Those 3 areas being Marine Park, Riverside Gardens, and Broad Street. So for each of these, we've provided a sample of some of the things that people said about why they love these areas. So for Marine Park, it's I love having access to the river and a place that's accessible for all. It's scenically beautiful and open space for the public. Love having a picnic in the park on the waterfront. I love the view of the river and the activities and events there. Some folks said that they love an area, but then also identified some room for improvement. So here, Marine Park was a jewel. Now it's an eyesore. Restroom looks like a prison cell and is never open, and there's no lights on in the pumping station. At Riverside Gardens, people said they love the connection to the river, the green space, and that it's well used for community events. That this is a beautifully realized park that makes the most of the river view. The view is amazing. Great open space for concert and gathering. And then another room for improvement. I wish there was a connection to Marine Park and the building in Riverside Park had stayed a cafe. More seating and more green space, please. And then finally, Broad Street. I love the charm of downtown Red Bank. The architecture, when maintained, and red brick sidewalks are beautiful. It's fun to stroll down Broad Street and its side streets to window shop. It's a perfect blend of the town. Here, room for improvement, do a proper job on the boardwalk. So far, it's been characterized by lack of planning and design. So how well do these locations and themes capture what you love about Red Bank? And here we can see some diversity of opinion. We have about 80% saying either very well or mostly, with some folks saying somewhat, or what they love about Red Bank was not captured at all. And so is there anything critical that we didn't mention? For those of you who said that what you love about Red Bank wasn't captured in the least, please tell us here, what did we miss? The arts and culture aspect. Certainly an important part of Red Bank. I love the diversity of our residents. I'd love to see more connection between Broad Street and Shrewsbury Ave business districts. Maple Cove is the only water access available. And Broad Street businesses aren't accessible to working class members. It's covered in puke on a Sunday morning. The diversity aspect, making it available to all. Climate change and other global issues. Things that are not a place, right? So it's hard to show diversity, education, and small town feel on a map. But some folks did find examples of those things and called them out. Shrewsbury Ave serves residents, not visitors. Yeah, Broad Street is for tourists. Okay, we'll move on to what folks wanted to see change. And so here, that same heat map analysis identified these three areas: the Hackensack Meridian Health area, the Maple Ave, Front Street, and Water Street area, and then what we're calling the gateway to Red Bank at Rector Bridge and Riverside. So starting with the Hackensack Meridian Health area, folks said things like the hospital needs to stay within the hospital zone. There's too much congestion on Front Street every day. That we need to find a way to incorporate the waterfront into the downtown. And the hospital is expanding into historic districts and destroying its character. And just as people found room for improvement in the things they love, they also found aspects to appreciate in the things that they want to see change. So historic homes and mature trees set back from the roadway are in this area, and people can afford to shop and eat here. It's genuine, not trendy. At Maple, Front, and Water, the traffic flow pattern is awful. Downtown should have a dense residential development. Something to slow down cars here. They're going so fast coming south from the bridge. This abandoned lot has such potential and it's been sitting dormant for years. And then an aspect to appreciate, the Red Bank Library is a community anchor. It has great public services. It feels a little vulnerable to the development around it. And then the gateway to Red Bank. So demolish the gas station structure, make the area a fitting statement to the entrance into Red Bank. Make the bridge more pedestrian friendly with regular sidewalk cleanup. Highlight the old maritime businesses and create river access, park views. The gateway into Red Bank is dangerous for pedestrians, cyclists, plus it's ugly. But an aspect to appreciate is it's a great opportunity for redevelopment. Keep history in mind, add interpretation, a river gateway. So now, how well do these locations and themes capture what you would like to see change in Red Bank? Give you a moment to get those responses in. Seems like here we have a little bit of a modal split. We have very well and somewhat coming in at almost 40% each. But there are still some folks, about 5%, who are saying that what I'd like to see change was not captured. So again, please tell us what we missed. What are those things or places that you would like to see change that we didn't mention? Shrewsbury Avenue should be just as vibrant as Broad. The intersection train crossing at Broad and Newman Springs Road. Eliminate train overlay zone. And the 95 master plan called for containing the growth of the hospital. We need guidance from professional planners like you to help this town achieve the goal. It should not be abandoned. The implementation of complete streets. The hospital overlay must stay on the north side of Front Street. The hospital should share water access with the borough since they don't pay taxes. Second, Broad and Newman Springs Road rail crossing. The highway district needs to be included. Layton Ave is a cut through. Speeds need to be reduced. And here's somebody responding saying Shrewsbury Ave is more vibrant than Broad. So gateway to Red Bank from the south and the west. More murals in intersections. So as these continue to come in, we'll receive them. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but as long as you submit your response, we'll get your we'll have it. I'm now going to introduce Adam Texa from FHI Studio to introduce the small area plans.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. So if we can go to the next slide. So the small area plans are a subset of the larger master plan effort. So they are plans for specific geographies. And we're going to be focusing on 3 areas: that's Sunset Park, Riverside Avenue, Route 35 Gateway, and the hospital area. The small area plans are really going to focus on your and our identified issues and opportunities, developing community-driven goals, and then providing recommendations for improvements or changes to those areas. So if we go to the next one. So the small area plans can be used by a variety of entities. So public entities, that's the borough, the county, the state, can use them to prioritize improvements and make regulatory changes. They can be used by civic groups to sort of coordinate their efforts, guide investment, and develop programming. And they can be used by private entities, whether those are sort of foundations or property owners or institutions, to adjust their development program, identify new areas where they would like to invest, and guide their design decisions. Where we are in the small area plans is we're about 1 step behind sort of the rest of the master planning effort, and that's intentional. We've identified the areas as part of a sort of a process that involved working with the borough stakeholders, and then looking at the results that came in on the online workshop. We've done stakeholder interviews with people who are interested in those sites or who have a vested interest in those sites. And we've undertaken some initial analysis of those areas. But we're still in the information gathering phase. And so what we're going to be doing today a little bit is getting public feedback and input from you all. Then we're going to be moving forward to goal setting and concept development. And before the plan is adopted, all of that will be brought back to you all for review and comment and update. So we're really still in a very preliminary phase of these. So the first area that we're talking about is Sunset Park. For those of you who are familiar with the Red Bank Recycling Center, we're at the sort of end of West Sunset Avenue, West Sunset Avenue. And there's been actually a considerable amount of work that's been done on this site. So this site is a former landfill. There is a remediation plan that is in place. There's been work with members of the community in the surrounding area to create a plan for what the park might include. And there's actually been a donation from a private individual to support the construction of the park once the remediation is in place. There is a need to identify gap funding to get the site ready for actually construction of a park. The Housing Authority has also identified a desire to work with the borough to integrate changes that they are planning for the site that is essentially immediately adjacent to the park. And there's also been some conversation about opportunities to connect the park to the Red Bank Primary School and the Bellhaven Nature area. So if we go forward here, in 2017, the borough worked with T&M engineers and the community to develop this sort of what's often called sort of a conceptual plan for the park. As you can see, it's got a lot of ideas there, including a sort of a great lawn, a boardwalk, some picnic pavilions, a playground, a community garden. But there is a recognition on sort of everybody's part that we talked to that this plan was put in place in 2017 and that there's going to need to be more engagement on what the park should actually look like once the remediation is actually underway and the park is starting to become real. And part of that is because, the park is going to need to respond to the changing needs of the neighborhood, but also changes in the landscape of where the borough's municipal facilities are at that time. So if a new park comes online somewhere else in the community, there may be less need for certain type of programming that was originally envisioned here. So our work is really going to be focusing on helping the borough come up with a plan to basically move towards implementation and help to identify possible opportunities for funding that would start to move this project forward. But in the meantime, what we're hoping for you all to share with us a little bit is if there's anything that the team should know about or consider as we continue to move forward with planning for the Sunset Park site. And while we're doing this, for whatever reason, I may not be visible to all of you, but for that, I apologize. So, yeah, so the desire to see the recycling center moved, potentially the idea of maybe a community garden, somebody appreciated this as an equity issue and should be a priority. The need for water access. I will just comment on the water access issue. One thing that we know is an issue here is because this is a former a landfill site, remediation requirements for the landfill site are going to impact the water access in this issue. It's just going to be something that's going to really be driven by the technical side of this. And then the question about what DB plans is to relocate the recycling and truck storage, certainly something that we're going to be looking at. Desire to see the Riverwalk starting there. So an interest in needing to prioritize projects. So these are all really great comments and are all very much consistent with the direction we're going. So we'll be leaving this open for any more comments that people would like to submit as we go forward. So the next area that is a focus is the Riverside Avenue Route 35 Gateway. If you remember from earlier in the presentation, this was one of those hotspots that Ryan had identified and that you all had identified as an issue area. We had a meeting with some residents who live in the area and really heard that the traffic issues in this area are really bad, that it's a really bad gateway into the borough, that the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure is really lacking in the area, that it feels very unsafe for people, and that the exit out of Bodeman Place there onto Riverside Avenue is really problematic. And one of the things that we heard over and over again was that there was a desire to see the redevelopment of the two sort of vacant gas stations that are there on the corner. And so we wanted to talk to you all a little bit about that today and get your thoughts on that. So if we go to the next slide. The first gas station is, the address is technically 80 Rector Place. So this is that gas station that is, if you're entering into the borough, it's there on your right-hand side. And what we'd like to know from you all is what types of land uses would you support on that site, assuming that some of the traffic impacts of those land uses could be addressed. Great. I always like to see these come in. So not a surprise that it looks like about a third of people would like to see some park and open space there, some interest in water-based businesses, and then a sort of plurality of interests in a variety of other land uses there, including restaurants and retail, some different housing potential opportunities there. And Dan noted here that in the chat, thank you, Dan, that it should be noted that you can vote for more than one of these. And we would like to sort of get from people some thoughts about, the variety of things that they would be willing to support. Thank you, Dan. So as we go forward with this, it looks like things are sort of settling down a little bit with these polls. Please take a moment to let us know if there's anything else you'd like us to know about the 80 Rector Place site. Either concerns that you have about what might happen there going forward, or ideas or thoughts about what it might be. Yeah, an interest in potentially the use of eminent domain for use as a public use. Yeah, there's sort of a recognition that the gateway area is part of a larger traffic system and can't be solved without sort of thinking about it within a larger system. Really questions about how to access an open space by foot. Desire to see it be good for people and the planet and environmentally sustainable. a feeling that maybe a major traffic pattern change would need to be taken place for the property to be used, because it can only be accessed from one location. A question about, what's wrong with open space with no building of any kind. Yeah, the recognition that the land is constrained, and that there may be issues with building housing on it, and a desire to maybe explore a traffic circle there. I think that's something that we might be looking at. So these are all really great ideas. So this will be, so if we go to the next slide, those will still be open for a minute as we talk about the next site. So the next site is on the sort of catty corner to the site that we were talking about previously. So once again, if you're coming into the borough on 35, it's sort of there on the sort of center right of that intersection. The address is technically 187 Riverside Avenue. It's a former Bridge Avenue gas station. For those who know, there's a sort of restaurant that's right next door to it. So again, the next question is about assuming that some of the traffic impacts could be addressed, what land uses would you support at that site? And again, this is one of the ones where you could select more than one option if there's more than one that interests you. So this is sort of interesting as some of the answers start coming in. It looks like sort of those D, E, and F sort of restaurants, general retail, offices. So more commercial uses seem to be in a little bit more of a preference than, thinking about hotels and lodging, again, parks and sort of open space, and that housing is sort of in the smaller minority here. And there's a comment in that just came in. Yeah, I think there is a recognition that everybody should be aware of is that as former gas stations, they tend to be very polluted spaces, and so they do need to be remediated before typically they can be redeveloped, and that may impact what uses can be on these sites. So again, what we'd like to know is if there's anything that you would like the team to know or consider about 187 Riverside Avenue site, and what opportunities or considerations should be taking in there. So interest in maybe sort of cannabis retail and dog park there. Potential opportunity for like EV charging stations there. Again, interest in sort of parking. So that may be something that was missed in the options above, which is sort of thinking about it as public parking space. Things like, maybe just leaving it as a gas station or encouraging it to continue to go that way. A recognition that there's a need for it to be more attractive, have a better aesthetic, because it's the first thing that you come into town. Micro retail spaces may be part of the traffic circle. Comment in the chats here that maybe thinking about it as a potential transportation hub or visitor center. Great. So let's leave this. This will be left open until we get to sort of the next question. So we look forward to continuing to get some of your responses here. And so the next area that we're looking at is what we're generally calling the hospital area. I recognize that the line drawn here is extends beyond the area that is sort of where the existing hospital is, but the hospital is sort of the dominant land use in this area. Sort of talking to stakeholders and listening to all your comments through the online workshop. We know that there's a sort of a parking problem issue here. The hospital has identified that as one of their big concerns. They're currently actually paying for on-street parking permits because they don't have enough parking. There's tension with the residential neighborhoods. This is an urban hospital, and it is really butting up against very much residential areas. The one thing that we're aware of is that, you know, the hospital is Red Bank's largest employer. And that they are really going to be, you know, following the market needs when it comes to the healthcare industry. So to be clear about this, you know, the hospital has indicated to us that there is no immediate plans to make major changes to the hospital. As some of you are aware, they have been purchasing some of the sites across Front Street as they become available. According to them, you know, those purchases are really strategic purchases, recognizing that the hospital needs are going to be changing substantially over the next several decades. So for those of you who are following this and aware of this within the sort of hospital industry, hospitals are really changing because of the changing, essentially, economic market in healthcare providers. So what you're seeing really across the country, and the hospital has identified this as sort of one of their concerns, is a need to sort of concentrate intensive uses within the hospital and overall to provide more outpatient care. So if in the traditional model, the model that this hospital was built in, a lot of your services were actually provided inpatient in the hospital. Increasingly, a lot of that is moving to outpatient care. And what that means is that you go in and you have your procedure done, or you have your visit, and then you leave that same day. So there's no sort of overnight staying there. So that's going to be something that is going to be, you know, really impacting the hospital long term, and we're seeing this in communities all across the state and the country. So if we go to the next slide. I think it's important to start to think about where the hospital may be going in the future. So they are going to be moving more likely towards sort of more outpatient facilities that happen in buildings that look a lot more like office buildings. They do have different needs than typical office buildings, but they're going to look a little bit more like what might be called like a medical office building, and have a different sort of quality to them than a sort of large hospital structure. So the medical service zone, which is currently what the hospital in, is likely going to, over time, it needs to be modernized to address the changes in hospital construction. The zone is really oriented towards a sort of outdated model for how hospitals are going to build in the future, and therefore going to run into some issues around essentially lots of variances where otherwise they may not need them. And that the B1, which is really the area across the street, is really insufficient to address outpatient medical office construction, or to even, quite frankly, talk about whether or not it should be permitted or not permitted in that area. So it's something that really we think it needs to be addressed going forward. So thinking about that and thinking about that framework, what we'd like you to think about are some of the potential efforts that might be appropriate in the sort of hospital small area. And so that might be, for example, establishing design standards for new construction. That might be, establishing sort of historic design standards, ensuring the hospital better matches the character of the surrounding area. Improving buffer standards between areas, residential and non-residential areas, is really talking about, when those land uses, really come up right next to, for example, a home or an apartment building or a condominium, what is the quality of the sort of landscaping and fencing and things between those two uses. Maybe people feel like there needs to be clear definition about what can and can't be built in the different areas. Interest in people, whether or not people would be interested in supporting construction of more off-street parking so that the hospital is taking up less parking in the sort of surrounding area. There has been discussion, I think, from a number of stakeholders, is the regulations that would increase waterfront access, and efforts to sort of improve waterfront access near the hospital. Any regulations that might encourage affordable housing in that area or would limit the medical office or outpatient construction. So I know these are some of the more complicated options that we've given you all to consider here. And it looks like there's a lot of variety of opinions. I do want to remind everybody that you can pick more than one of these here. So it's looking a lot like, waterfront access is really important to people. Clear definitions about what can and can't be built, and really looking at sort of design standards and buffers are really kind of taking a lead, but the recognition that, people do see a need for some parking and potentially affordable housing and limiting outpatient construction, but really more focusing on the design quality and the relationship with residential uses. So like all of these, we'd like to end with just an opportunity for you to let us know if there's anything else you'd like us to consider as we start to delve in a little bit deeper into the hospital area. Yeah, so we're sort of reinforcing the need for being very specific and very defined. I think that was, sort of reinforcing one of the options that was there. Yeah, some questions for time, questions and comment. There will be some questions and comment at the end. So desire to sort of see, stop expansion, which is, interesting, and I think is an important thing to recognize, that, that would seem to be a sort of lower priority in the previous questions, but seems like people still see, there's some people who still feel very strongly about that. Questions about whether there be limitations on how much property the hospital can buy. Typically, that's not something that anybody can regulate for that, but we can get into that a little bit more in the Q&A if people would like. Foster a better relationship with the hospital. Yeah, the sense that the hospital isn't porous at all, and that there needs to be better waterfront access. A desire to sort of see the preservation of the historic fabric of the town, taxing them. I think that's, again, something we can get into in the question and answer, but it is worthwhile noting that that's not actually something that the borough has a lot of control over. That's something that's regulated at the state level. Great, so we'll leave these, and the question here about why do we care about the hospital's parking needs, all good questions. So why don't we end this here, and I'll hand it back over to Susan and the BFJ team.
Yeah. And we are almost finished with our speaking, and we want to make sure, I think people were asking, and we hear you. We want to make sure that there's time for question and answer from all of you. So just one or two more slides. In terms of our next steps, after tonight, we're going to be refining the vision and goals based on what we've heard from you all tonight and those planning themes that we talked about early in the presentation. We're going to start working on the draft strategies and recommendations. We have not put any of those down to paper. We have some ideas based on what we've been learning and what we've been hearing tonight as well. But we're still very much in the information gathering stage and have been for quite some time. So now we're ready to kind of move in to the strategies phase, and then really dive into the small area planning that Adam touched on. Moving again beyond sort of information gathering and thinking about what might actually be proposed. So stay tuned on the next public workshop. We do anticipate that it will be in person. It seems like COVID is moderating perhaps finally. So we are hopeful that we can meet in person and have just a larger group, with full open to the public as it's tonight, except in person. So at that workshop, we would be presenting some of the draft strategies and really getting your feedback on that and testing those out with all of you. So I think next slide, we're going to be moving into the Q&A, which Kelsey will moderate. And Kelsey, you want to go over the ground rules just so that we can be hopefully orderly?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for sticking through that presentation with us. And we know a lot of you have been excited to ask some questions and state some comments. So just as a reminder, our meeting is open until 8:30. So we just want to make sure that everyone raises their hand if they would like to ask a question or make a comment. And since we do have limited time, we do ask you to please keep your question or comment brief so we can get to as many people as possible. And then please ensure that your question or comment pertains to the master plan project and what was presented tonight. And if for some reason you would not like to state your question out loud, that's absolutely fine. You can email me at kcon@fhistudio.com with any additional questions, and we can get back to you that way. So I'm seeing Dan has his hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you, Dan, and you may go ahead and ask your question or state your comment.
Hi, so my question is, when will the 80-page Red Bank Today document be available? Will we have an opportunity to give feedback before it's finalized? That's it.
Thanks, Dan. I saw your comment early on, and we're making some tweaks to it, typos, things like that. But yes, it is the intent that it will be posted on the website so that the public can take a look and certainly test that out and make sure we got things right. And it's not a final document by any means. It'll be incorporated into the final master plan, but that's towards the end of the year, so there's still plenty of time for edits.
Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and unmute John now. So John, you may go ahead and ask your question or state your comment.
Good evening, everyone. This is John Jackson, council candidate. Thank you, team, for this really fantastic presentation. In the beginning of your presentation, you had listed out groups or organizations that you had engaged for feedback. I'm asking specifically about any plans for historic preservation. Have you or will you be engaging things like our Historic Preservation Committee, especially for that hospital zone?
Yeah, great comment, John. We did actually meet with them as part of the Arts and Cultural and Historic Focus Group, and I believe there were 2 members of the Historic Commission on that call. So we definitely got their feedback, and we certainly talked about the hospital on that call.
Great, thank you.
All right, so we'll move on to Beth, and I'm going to unmute you now, Beth, and you can go ahead and make your comment.
Yes, hi, I'm Beth. Lucas, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I live on Bodman Place, and there's the proposal for the apartment building going up, and Bodman Place is it's a dead end street. Is there any plan on having, say, an exit out of Bodman Place, another way to get in and out of onto our street?
Yeah, this is Adam. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So where that sits right now is we know that it's an issue, and it's certainly something that we're going to be looking at. The developer is committed to putting in an application for a stoplight at that intersection. There are some questions. So it's a state controlled road. So it's not something that the borough has any say in. They have to submit that application to the DOT. And there is some question about whether or not the DOT is going to approve it because of the proximity to another stop controlled intersection, the major intersection there. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at are different options. We understand that if you are essentially exiting out of Bodmin Place, you may end up having to go all the way over the bridge, turn around, do some funky U-turn kind of stuff just to be able to get back going the right direction. So we're really going to be studying that closely and trying to come up with recommendations that would either support the application of a stop control there, a stoplight there, or would provide an alternative solution that would address some of those issues. But it is a complicated problem there.
Thank you.
All righty, we're going to move on to Angela. So Angela, I'm going to unmute you now and you can go ahead and make your comment.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Cindy Burnham, and I just wanted to make you aware regarding Maple Cove, which is at the bottom of Maple Avenue, that was a junk area, a dump, and the residents came together and saved it from development. And it's a great little pocket park. It's not a Green Acre funded park, but it is on the Green Acres list. And it is the only public access to the Navesink River where you can hand launch a non-motorized boat. You can put your feet in the water. You can see the fish in the water. And it's a huge kayak launch site. So I want you to be aware of that.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Angela. All right, and let's move on to Mary Ellen. So I'm going to unmute you now, Mary Ellen, and you can.
Hi, this is Mary Ellen Mess. I live at 95 Hudson Avenue. I just want to reiterate that the format that you've used for this meeting and also the format that you used for your online survey really excludes a great many residents here in Red Bank who don't have the digital skills or digital access to participate. And I work at the library and I had been handing out flyers to people, encouraging the people who come in and use our computers to fill out the survey. And so many of them really got so frustrated that they just gave up, which might be why you have 1,000 people who actually logged on and only 500 and some odd who completed it. And I think that alone really skews your data to a certain demographic. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is I'm really shocked because I've been following this very closely. And I know that a lot of people on the call here tonight, I looked at the names, are people who are very active, who advocate at planning board meetings and zoning board meetings. And I don't know any of them who were involved in the focus groups. So I'm really shocked that you're at a point where you're moving on to come to some conclusions. And so many of us have been excluded from this process because I think your 5 top priorities would look very different. And the fact that historic preservation isn't on there, and environmental quality isn't on there is really shocking and disturbing to me. So that's kind of all I want to say about this process. I really think it's been skewed to a certain demographic that excludes a lot of people, both in terms of age and in terms of income level and in terms of education level.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. As we mentioned, there'll be more opportunities in the fall, and we do hope to continue to encourage and hear from as many residents and interested people in Red Bank as possible.
But you're already drafting.
We're not, we're not drafting yet.
You've just said that
Yeah.
several times this
We're
evening.
we're not quite there yet. We're really just at the beginning of that phase. So it's certainly, there are no conclusions that have been drawn. And that's why we're hearing from all of you tonight. And that's why we'll be hearing from the community again in the fall as well. But thank you.
I also want to thank you for your comment, Mary
Yeah.
Ellen. As we undertook the virtual workshop, the challenge of reaching deep into the community is one that we took really serious. And we were tracking demographics of the participants that completed the survey. And then we tailored those pop-up meetings and targeted outreach to help fill the gaps where we felt like folks from Red Bank were being underrepresented. So it is a challenge, and I certainly appreciate the help that you provided at the library. That's a fantastic resource. If you have additional ideas about ways that we can engage with the community, we would love to hear those.
Well, one of the other things that I find very distressing is that anybody on the planet can fill out that survey. So I know you do ask for zip code and you ask for some demographic information, but people can lie. And so who knows, I think it should have been limited to residents and property owners, because why should somebody else who doesn't live in town, doesn't have any interest except maybe as an investor, be able to set the direction of the town? I really think that's problematic, and I disagree with that decision. And for those of you who are on the planning board who are listening in here, I think that was a mistake, because ultimately that was your decision to do that. So, and I do think that a lot of the language, well, the other thing is those priorities could be interpreted in many different ways. Because if I pick affordable housing as my concern, right now, housing policy in New Jersey is really, really terrible. And we're relying on private developers to solve that problem, which means we have to build thousands of luxury units in order to meet our fair share housing plan obligation. And so if I pick affordable housing, yes, we need it, but I would rather maintain that housing in our neighborhoods in single and maybe 2 and 3 family homes than build high rises. But I don't really get a chance to express that adequately because of the design of the survey. And so you could say affordable housing and somebody could come up and decide, oh, well, we need to build more high density housing and luxury units, which is not what I agree with. So there are a lot of things about that survey I found that are very problematic. And then you use a word like placemaking. Well, what the heck does that mean to anybody who's not in the planning field? What it means, folks, is displacement. And that's what's been going on here. So these are all things that I feel are very strongly about. And I just needed to express that. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
Thank you. We really appreciate the comment, and feel free to follow up with Kelsey's email at the bottom if you have further comments that you want to share.
Yes, thank you very much. And as a reminder to anyone, if there are any comments additional that you would like to submit and take a bit more time, you can email me at kcon@fhistudio.com, and we will definitely read all of those and incorporate them into the plan. So thank you so much. And I'm going to move now on to Amy. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Amy, and you can make your comment.
Hi, nice presentation. Thank you. I have random questions. Are any of you or any people in your team or your office group residents of Red Bank or local to the area at all?
None of us happen to be residents of Red Bank. I believe most of our team is within half an hour to 45 minutes are certainly a good chunk of the team. And so we had some familiarity with Red Bank already. I know I've been there many times. But no, none of us happen to be residents of the borough.
Okay, and the other thing is, in your experience, obviously you've done this for other towns. What is the end result? The town comes up with a master plan. How often is it actually followed? How often are the recommendations carried through? I found that in other jurisdiction that I was involved with, there had been a master plan, and it turned out that significant parts of the plan were completely ignored, so that people built things that shouldn't have been built according to the ordinances and the master plan, and the town ended up having a major change that wasn't, I don't think, appealing. So how do these master plans become an effective tool to actually get the plan executed as intended?
Well, it often depends on what the recommendation is. So if it's more of the set of policies that the master plan adopts or enables, then those are policies that the borough should be following. So the planning board and the zoning board should be following those policies in all of their actions. So that's at a very basic level. The actions that they take should be consistent with the master plan, and if they're not, then the borough is opening itself up to legal challenge. Then on the regulation side, if there are changes to zoning or similar regulations that are proposed in the master plan, those should be undertaken or adopted as soon as possible after the master plan, if it's something that the borough wants to proceed with. What we'll do in the master plan, and what generally master plans do, is they'll outline sort of the basics of, for example, a zoning change, not necessarily every last detail, but what the recommendation kind of is. And then the next step would be for the governing body, the council, to take that up, under the advice of the planning board as well. But ultimately, the council is the one who adopts laws and regulations. So they would need to enact that. And there may also be recommendations in the master plan that recommend capital improvements, park improvements, infrastructure. And those are really going to be a function of funding and the availability of that and the priorities of the borough. So it can really vary. But in terms of the sort of ongoing development decisions, they should be consistent with the policies, and the regulations should be changed to be consistent with the master plan recommendations.
Yeah, Susan, if I can just sort of follow up on that, I think it's really important to understand that the master plan is a sort of guiding document, and it is also looking out 10 years. And so sometimes there can be a sense that the plan is not being enacted, or it's not moving forward. But part of that has to do with, quite frankly, just the relatively slow moving process that is changing infrastructure in the United States right now. At the same time, I think it is also critically important to recognize that having things in your master plan make it more likely that, as Susan says, when grant funding becomes available, that the town may be competitive for those kinds of projects. So it may be very beneficial to be putting things in a master plan, for example, that have a limited rate of success. Maybe there's only a 5% chance that the recommendation may move forward, but you want to be prepared so that if a state agency or the federal government changes policies and starts making grant funding available, they can move forward. We're seeing that right now a lot with the federal IIJA funding. A lot of municipalities, before that bill was passed at the federal level, had put in a lot of things in their comprehensive plans that they wanted to see happen. And when the funding became available at the federal government, they were sort of ready to act right away. And they were able to point to their master plans and say, look, we have community support for this, so we can move this forward. So I know it can be a very frustrating process. Susan and I can attest to this. We devote our careers to writing these things and working on these things, and it can be hard sometimes to not see things that you care a lot about move forward. But it is an important process, and it is important work to be done to sort of set yourself up for that, both like I said, at a local level and for county and state and federal requirements.
All right, thank you, Susan and Adam. And we have another hand raised, so I see JP. I'm going to unmute you now, and so you can make your comment.
Hi, this is actually Councilman Ed Ziprich. I really wanted to thank you for an informative forum tonight. We've been listening in, great questions, great participation. I'm curious to, since you guys are the planning professionals, could you sort of connect the dots between a vision plan, a strategic plan, and a master plan? And are we putting the cart before the horse by not doing a strategic plan and a vision plan first? Or will that sort of and join with the master plan that will come out of all of the research that you're doing?
Well, I think the idea is that it's all three. So a master plan should be grounded in a vision. And so that's part of what we do, through the community engagement, and we learn as much as we possibly can, from technical experts, from data review, to understand the community and then start to develop a vision based on what we're hearing and learning. So that should be foundational as part of the master plan. And then in terms of strategies, that's sort of the outcome of the master plan. And there are, standalone strategic plans that some communities do undertake. But they tend not to be grounded in that vision and policy. And so, they're not the traditional master plans. And so, when we undertake a master plan like this, and particularly a brand new one, a comprehensive master plan, we are really trying to tie in all three of those elements. So the master plan is grounded in vision, but it also has that action-oriented outcome of clear strategies.
Oh, thanks for that, Susan. Could you sort of prioritize which document should come first, second, third?
It's all the same document. There may be different pieces of the document. So the vision in the order of like the table of contents, they'll probably be, vision will be early on, and then you'll go through your existing conditions, your trends, your data points, and then concluding with those action-oriented strategies. So it is all the same document, and it's all undertaken as part of the same process.
Okay, so the vision plan, the master plan, the strategic plan will all be included in what you guys produce?
That's the idea. Yep.
Okay.
And let me just add really
Oh my God.
quickly to this, Susan, that that you do not have to have one strategic plan. So what you may end up, the master plan will be strategic, as Susan says, and identify actions, but clearly there are going to be, larger projects. A great example of that is the Sunset Park area, where you really need to sort of focus in on a specific project and essentially create a strategic plan for that project itself. And so that's a little bit of what we're doing with the small area plans.
Mhm.
And the same way, I think the vision that we're talking about, a vision plan for the Gateway area, right, that will include strategic pieces. So I know that can sound a little bit like rushing nested dolls that never end up, and you always end up with, but the idea is that you can work at different scales and at different focus areas, incorporating all three of those elements, sort of vision and strategic elements at the same time.
Thanks for that, Adam. I appreciate it. It's interesting because back in the 90s when the planning was done, that took Red Bank from many of us know it was Dead Bank before, and they put all of these plans together, did all of the community engagement like you guys are doing now, to bring us to where we are now, with so many different projects and things realized based on the work that the teams did back in the 90s. I'm just really curious as to whether the borough itself needs to not only look at the strategy, the vision, and the master planning, but also sort of the sub elements of each document that would include things like the historic elements to the master plan, or the bike and pedestrian elements to the master plan, much of which I worked on early on in my involvement in town.
You know, Councilman, it's a really great point, and I think it's probably one that we should make clear early on, that, you know, one of the benefits of master planning in New Jersey is that you do have the ability to update those components at any given point, and only that. For example, you might want to do just a parks and open space element or a circulation element, and that's something the borough hasn't done in quite some time. And so this master plan is not necessarily, I will say, it will not solve every issue. It's not gonna solve every traffic problem. It's not gonna identify you know, specific traffic improvements for every problematic intersection. It will identify problem areas and possibly areas for more study, but I could see, you know, one strategy might be that you need to do a standalone circulation element, right? Because that's a problem that is so complex and needs further study and further engagement, that might be an outcome of the master plan. Same with historic preservation. So there is the opportunity, and it's not necessarily kicking the can down the road. It's recognizing that this is an element that needs, you know, further attention, further study, further analysis, and that is an outcome of this master plan. Does that make sense? Hopefully it did. But thanks for the comment. It's really great. Oh, he's back to mute.
Oh, let's go ahead and unmute him. Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. No, thank you for that feedback. It was really, really important. But I just wanted to make sure that that the public attending the meeting tonight understood that there are so many subcategories and factions that go into planning for the future. It's very rewarding when you look at our website at what was planned back in the 1990s and see how much of that has been realized.
Yeah.
And that this element or this document that you guys are working on to help us create will take Red Bank not only 10 years into the future, but probably 20, 25, 30 years into the future. So it's really, really critical to have as much community input as we can get. Thanks so much.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for those comments. And we're going to move ahead to Angela. So Angela, I'm unmuting you now. So you should be able to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Cindy Burnham again. I'm on Angela's computer.
Noted. Noted.
But anyway, I think I remember in the previous master plan that the hospital was supposed to stay on the north side of Front Street. But they have since encroached across the street and are now going and moving into the historical residential neighborhood. And they are buying up properties that were taxable that are not taxable. And people are very upset about this. I mean, the hospital is just growing and growing and growing. Red Bank was the one that built the parking garage, and then they sold it to Riverview. So now Riverview thinks that they could have that whole section as part of their campus, and that cannot happen. We have got to keep them off of Mechanic Street. We have to keep them off of Washington Street and off of Spring Street. I mean, it's really important here. I don't care how many, the people that work there that live in Red Bank are probably very few, because you can see them all coming in, driving into town, but it's really a problem. It is such a problem. And I just really want to ask you to please reduce their encroachment area. They own so many properties along the river and across the street on the south side of Front Street that they have torn down the houses, and now there are just vacant lots. Like, why don't they do something with them? You know?
So, yeah, thank you very much for that comment. And I really understand that. So, you know, I think it is really important to recognize that the hospital really is, butts right up against these residential areas and these historic areas. And, I think it is really a quality of Red Bank that you have, what is essentially, very much single family residential neighborhoods.
Yes.
that are, really right across the street from this major facility, this major
Mhm.
institutional facility. And that just creates a lot of opportunities for tensions and barriers and problems. So there's a real recognition of that. And I will say in our conversations with the hospital, they recognize that and understand that. To be really clear about this, I think it is really important to understand where the limitations of municipal power is. So the municipality cannot legally stop the hospital from buying property. That's not something that they have the jurisdiction to do, just the way that the municipality can't stop you from going out and purchasing property. That's not something that the borough can control, nor can the county or the state or
We
the
pay
federal
taxes.
government. I understand that, and I know it's incredibly frustrating to recognize that that's the case. So there are a couple of things that to be aware of as we go forward with this. One thing is what the municipality can control is what can be built. Right. So there is incentives and disincentives to buying land based on what can be built there.
Well, you know what they do? Wait, excuse me. What they do is they have a builder come in and tear down Victorian houses because he's going to put up a medical building, and then the hospital buys the medical building.
So again, there's
stuff.
nothing to be clear about that. The purchase, sale, or exchange of property is not something that the municipality can legally control.
But even
That
if
is,
but shouldn't it stay within its zone?
so that is something to think about and to look at. Is so that was one of the questions that we had up there was, what people were interested in looking at, and one of the answers up there was essentially restricting the hospital from growing outside of its area.
Right. And they already have. They're on the west side already. They're on the river. They bought a convalescent home, and now they're over there on the river, on the west side.
I think that's important. I think it is important to consider that, and we will be sharing the results of that survey. And I think it is important to recognize that there's going to be a variety of interests there. I don't mean to diminish the importance of paying property taxes. I'm personally just a big believer in the importance of paying property taxes. I do think it is important to recognize that when those people do, when hospital employees, when visitors do come into the municipality, they do contribute to the tax base by purchasing products and goods and foods and services. There are employees of the hospital who do live in the municipality. So we want to take a real holistic approach, and I want to make sure that you understand that I am hearing that this conflict or this tension between the hospital and the adjacent neighborhoods is one of the reasons why we selected this area as a focus area and really felt like it needed special attention. So I do want to make sure you understand that is one of the reasons why we're looking at this, and it's going to be a very complicated process. That's another reason why we picked it, is just because it's not something that you can necessarily address in broad strokes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, so we're coming up on time, but we have time for one more comment if we can just keep things snappy. So Mary Ellen, I'm going to unmute you again, and you can go ahead and make your comment.
I don't know if you can answer this quickly, but I'm interested in knowing how the master plan will affect our zoning ordinances, because the big problem here is we have zoning ordinances and we have very liberal granting of variances, and residential neighborhoods in Red Bank have been chipped away at lot by lot, variance by variance, so that many of us live adjacent to parking lots with stadium lights in the lots and dumpsters on the property lines. And this is continuing. So how will the master plan help us, first of all, gain back some of these residential areas by eliminating some parking lots and or protect what we have left, because it really is a problem.
Mhm, mhm.
And the zoning board doesn't seem to care if a dumpster is on your property line. They continually allow projects, variances, no setbacks, parking variances, height and density variances. But if it's next to your home, it does affect the value of your property and your quality of life.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question, and Mary Ellen, is something that we're definitely looking at. Just broadly speaking, the zoning has to follow the master plan, and zoning by law has to be consistent with the master plan, but the master plan doesn't flip a switch and change the zone when it's adopted. So you do have to take that next step, the borough and the governing body. So that's sort of the sequence, is that the master plan would be adopted, and then subsequently the governing body would take up that zoning change. So that's sort of number one. Number two is that, people always have the ability to seek variances, and that's not something that you can't just ban variances. However, if we are seeing, ongoing variances, that is sort of the same thing, and it's creating, ongoing problems, then that is something that we want to look at. And we're going to be digging into that a little bit more and understanding, what are these variances that are being granted over and over again? Are they the same types of things? And what can we do to mitigate, particularly where those residential properties butt up against commercial properties? So maybe it's looking at things like, increasing the required buffer, more stringent setback rules. And so it's not going to stop somebody from seeking a variance, and the zoning board is a quasi judicial board that they take them up, they consider them. But we may be able to mitigate that in the future, so that even if they get a variance, it's still a lesser variance, if that makes any sense. So we're going to be getting into those levels of details a bit, and then trying to mitigate that and ensure the quality of life for those single family neighborhoods.
Well, listen,
Yeah.
all the developers here in Red Bank are singing more, more, more. I can't remember the band or the singer that sang it, but that's their theme song. And so, you give them the one developer an inch, and then the next one comes and they use that as precedent. And it's really, really problematic. I mean, they just granted a 400% increase in density on the corner of Monmouth and Pearl Streets. So, I would hope that I will be able to attend another meeting where we could really talk about it, because there are houses on Oakland, which is in the BR2 zone, where they put a parking lot behind these people's houses, and the dumpster is next to the property line, and they have stadium lights in their yards, and that's okay. So
Mary Ellen, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so thank you so much for your comments and for everyone who commented tonight and attended the meeting. And we really appreciate it. And
I'm going to break our own rules real quickly. Kelsey, I'm sorry. I do this to Kelsey all the time. I apologize. Mary, so you have Kelsey's email address there on the screen. We really would encourage you to email Kelsey any thoughts you have about issues. A lot of what you're talking about are issues around sort of buffer standards and landscaping standards and where things are. And typically those are things that municipalities like Red Bank that are growing a lot, their zoning ordinances can really lag behind on some of those things, because they weren't written in an era where that was a big issue. So it's certainly something that we can look at and talk about. So if you would email Kelsey, and I've already heard a lot of what you said here about sort of the location of dumpsters, the quality of lighting and the stadium lighting, the proximity of parking to residential neighborhoods or residential properties. Those are all really important things that can be addressed. Again, as Susan said, they're not going to be immediately changed as part of the adoption of the master plan. But if the borough takes up zoning changes as a result of the master plan, that's when those things would start to be there, and we can start to talk about that here. So So
Yeah, and
thank
if I
you.
could quickly echo, Mary Ellen, if you do send in comments, specific locations are always very helpful. So, highlighting where these problems are occurring, and that helps us understand, is it a particular problem with one zone, or is it more universal, and what types of solutions might we think about that would really address that problem?
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, again for attending. And as a reminder, my email address is kcon@fhistudio.com, and that's on the screen at the bottom. So please definitely email me and let me know if you have additional comments, any follow up on anything you heard tonight. We absolutely want to hear it. So thank you so much for joining. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and have a wonderful Friday and weekend. Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.